of Red Sun AC, year 1833, Oricea, Valorous, Dallas Tie. The light of the throne room bleeds into the hallway as the door opens before Alistair. The young noble steps forth, entering a darkened balcony, reminding him of that day. He hesitates for a bit, gazing down onto his bloody hand, but the illusion fades as Lord Casterus signals for Alistair to step behind him. He acknowledges and greets the elder nobleman as he takes his seat behind him, gazing over the throne room that is shining with brilliant sunlight. The throne room appears much more crowded than before, as an audience of hundreds gathers from men to women, ranging from commoners to the nobilities, each representing everything from the Merchants' Guild to the Farmers' Guild. Even the space around the throne is more crowded than when Alistair had first visited. In addition to the royal guards on their post, a man stands to the left and the right of the throne. The man on the left, a much more elderly man, in elegant robes of blue and folded shoulder cape of black with wavy patterns upon them, is clearly the archmage of the court, while the one on the right bears a much more obscure and simple garment of black long cloak that wraps tightly around his body. Unlike the others, the man on the right carries a sword on his belt, suggesting that he is also a royal guard, but possesses neither the usual armor or standard weaponry. It appears that the whole entirety of the Queen's court has gathered, from her treasurer to her generals and even the ambassador Cornelith, making his presence known at the front of the nobilities on one side of the room. Even in the council chamber of Idris, never had so many people from such an array of ranks and statuses gathered in such a manner. As the afternoon bells toll across the city, from the cathedral towers to the ones above them, the royal guard stomps their spears. The man on the right calls for silence of the throne room, as those in the balcony and audience directs their attention to the throne before them. With another stomp of their spears, the queen enters in an elegant gown, sparkling in silver, adorned with matching gloves and a crown atop her head as she steps before her seat. The crowds and those in the audience bow in respect to the queen as she takes her seat, with her gaze fixed on the crowd, and those in the balconies follow suit, taking their seat afterward. Lords and ladies, the queen begins, masters of guilds and representatives of the church, I've gathered you all here for a matter of the direst of natures. The 2 days previously, grave news has come to my attention that the town of Canine, near the border to Idris, has been attacked by Vizians. Noises begin to stir with phrases of, "How is this possible?" and "My God, this is terrible." But as the queen continues, the room turns silent again. I've sent a rider to confirm this, and unfortunately, it is true. Canine was raided, and there were no survivors. The noise from the crowd begins to grow increasingly raucous. However, the queen's voice cuts through the crowd. I can assure you that we will increase patrols on the road, but I wish to instate several measures to keep your merchants and laborers safe. I am hereby declaring martial law all across Valorous. A curfew is to be set, and the flow of travelers moving in and out of the city will be organized by the military, meaning that limited amounts of people can enter and leave the city per day. The bit of noise from the crowd turns into an instant to loud cries of protests from peasants, guild leaders, nobles, all yelling over one another, all visibly upset at the decree. Silence! The man on the queen's right orders. And the royal guards stomp their spears, sending a thunderous echo throughout the room. The queen continues. Those who will be allowed to leave the city will be guarded by additional soldiers, and we will relocate the surrounding settlements to the capital. We cannot support any more refugees, a voice in the audience interrupts. Yes, we are already taking in thousands from the west, and we are now taking in refugees from the inland too, who aren't even under attack. The audience of the throne room begins shouting amongst one another again, as much as the queen, and even those on the balconies join in on the fray, calling out their opinions for nobody in particular to hear. Alistair looks around at the chaos and confusion, then turns to Lord Casterus, who sits beside him in grim silence, pointing a stern stare at the audience below. The young noble listens intently for the various opinions being thrown around, from the ridiculous to the cruel, from a few calling of the drafting of the refugees to their relocation, even a few shouting to remove them from the capital completely. The attention on the queen has disappeared as the audience turns against one another, directly yelling at each other's faces, but she remains stoic as she lifts herself from her throne and stomps her foot loudly on the ground with her heel thundering even more than the stomp of the spears. Her brow furrowed and the judgment of the gods burned in her eyes as she gazes down upon them from with the sun shining brightly behind her, and the throne casting a shadow over those in the audience. Silence! Have all of you forgotten who our enemy is in this war? You dare place your profit over the value of a life, especially when those lives are of your countrymen. Have you no shame, no pride in your country, or have you been spent so long counting gold that it has filled your brain and caused you all to lose your senses? The crowd stops, as if time itself had been frozen, until a voice resumes. Out from the audience, a man of short brown hair and a goatee appears, with luxurious robes of black and red. A face that is much older than the queen's appears, and the man speaks with a calm yet stinging voice full of arrogance and judgment. He approaches the throne and speaks. But it was not your policy of rescuing the Vizians that caused this war, your majesty. You claim that we have forgotten our countrymen, but last I recalled, it was because you had been secretly taking Vizian slaves from the regime, and now our people are dying in this war. All because you valued the lives of some foreign slave and thought nothing of the consequences. The queen stares at the man before her, and although she allows not a glimpse to show, a fire of hatred burns in her eyes. The man continues. Even worse, you allowed these so-called Vizian slaves to enter our fair city, offering to educate them and waste our taxes on these foreigners who may not even be slaves. They could be agents of the regime, posing as slaves. Also, they can sneak into our soldiers in a backline in our kingdom. The man turns to the audience. Queen Silrenus claims she stands for us. But she has exposed us to danger. She started this war, and she allowed these filthy Vizians to invade our home, and now our people pay the price. Our women are raped, our children kidnapped, and our fathers die in this needless war, all because of our Majesty's recklessness, negligence for her countrymen. The men around the queen, from her archmage to the royal guards, all grow visibly tense and irradiates an equal fire of hostility. And now she attempts to restrict our way of life, our merchants, our gold, and our people, while she keeps sending more men to die in this futile war. She is as much responsible for these deaths as the Vizians. Enough, Calder. The queen's right-hand guard rushes out and grabs the noble, pulling him by the collar. Alter, stop, the queen orders. What do you intend to do, Alter, the man mocks. Are you accusing the queen of treason? He asks, his hand reaching for the hilt of his sword. Enough, Alter. Let Calder go, the queen orders once again. Alter turns to the queen before he turns to Calder, growing visibly agitated, but deciding against his instinct, the marshal pushes him back to the audience instead, slowly returning to his post. I mean no disrespect, your majesty. The defiant nobleman takes 2 steps forward again and bows with a mocking smile. I am only speaking the truth that all of us are thinking, but no one dares to say. Your opinion is noted, Lord Calder, but I stand by my decision. Of course, your majesty. You are the queen, after all. She turns her eyes back to the rest. The laws will be in place immediately. All further details will be passed down to the heralds. Inform your laborers and make any necessary changes. All of you are dismissed. Although the tension remained afloat in the court's air, the crowd respectfully bows to their queen as she departs with her archmage and guards in tow. The audience begins leaving the throne room as well, from the balconies and the floor below, except Decorous, who remains seated, looking out with empty pairs of eyes, floating deep in his thoughts. After a moment, the throne room has become nearly empty. The nobleman finally pushes himself off his seat with his cane and steps out of the balcony with Alistair. A bit more intense than usual, Decorous remarks. Who was he? I assume you're referring to the man who nearly accused the queen of treason? Alistair nods. Calder Horace Raygard, head of the Raygard family. His family was one of the most prestigious families in Valorous. However, his father attempted to back the Red Tyrant and plotted the conquest of the region. Needless to say, the queen's father discovered the plot and stripped the Raygard family of its lands and titles. The Raygard family was terribly humiliated, and the queen agreed to restore parts of their family to Calder, as it seemed like the right thing to do. But he watched his father humiliated in the streets and was called a traitor throughout his life. Despite what the queen did for him, he hated Orsenera. And like his father, he has no love for the Vizians, and even less when this war began. Worse still, he is right in that many agree with him. And do you? Of course not. Vizians or humans, nobody deserves to live as they do in that regime. I wholeheartedly back the Queen, and I do not believe for a second that her rescue of the Vizian slaves is what caused this war. It may be a secret to the public, but in reality, the Dallastai monarch, from the Queen's great-grandfather to her, and taken part in freeing thousands of Vizian slaves, and the regime knows it. The war was inevitable. The only thing that mattered was how and when the Vizians could obtain the resources to actually do something about it. I see. It matters not. It seems like your story has been confirmed, Lord Alistair. What will you do now? Your task in Dallastai is completed. Alistair shakes his head. Not at all. I came here to assist with the refugee crisis, and I intend to do so. It is only that we've come upon such misfortune. The young noble turns away. Ah, yes, I suppose that was your original goal. A pair of royal guards approach the two gentlemen, and as they descend the stairs to the palace lobby. Excuse me, are you Lord Alistair Preston Carlyle? Yes, is there something you need? The Queen is asking for you, Lord Alistair. I see. I will follow then. I'll wait for you outside the palace, says Caceres. Thank you, Lord Caceres. The nobleman nods and limps away. The guards turn and lead Alistair down a corridor. Right this way, Lord Alistair. He follows the guards through the multiple hallways until they arrive before a large silver door, guarded by another pair of royal guards. The door opens and the young Carlyle enters a private meeting room with a long rectangular table sitting at the center, surrounded by racks of books and silverware on all four corners. Not a single window is in this room, but the oil chandelier over the table illuminates the entire room brightly. Sitting below it, the Queen. Standing behind her, the man Calder referred to as Alter, and sitting in a seat to her left is the Archmage. The three pull their attention to Alastair as he enters with skipping heartbeats and trembling fingers. The young noble bows to the Queen as she directs him to a seat across the table from her as the door closes behind him. Alastair carefully extracts the chair, sitting on it, laying his hand flat on the table on top of one another while doing his best to suppress the rushing emotion in his head. The Queen greets him. Welcome, Lord Alastair. Thank you, Your Majesty. No, it is I who owe you a thanks. But allow me to introduce my advisors first, my Archmage, Decorous von Vidari, and my Marshal, Alter. Alistair looks at the two men in greater detail and notices that behind the grey beards and hair of the old Archmage are long pointed fingers, but he possesses no other feature that is usually identifiable with that of a high elf. The other man, Alter, carries a serious demeanor through his brown eyes that appear fixed for eternity to some faraway place, as if he cannot even imagine or acknowledge those who around him except the Queen. His aura is hostile, unyielding, and stern, though that might just be his demeanor rather than any real observation of his personality, though his frame, in contrast, is slim and delicate, and his face reflects as much with a slim chin, sharp as a knife, with short jet black hair that flows down to his neck. Alistair returns his attention back to the Queen as she continues, As I have said, thank you for what you have done. I cannot even fathom the consequences otherwise. I did nothing praiseworthy, Your Majesty, only the right thing. Yes, we could use more men who only wish to do the right thing around here, but alas, morality and ethics come in short supply in times of crisis. Will you be returning to Idris soon? No, my Queen. Father Decorous came here to assist with the refugee crisis, and as I have said to Lord Caceres, I intend to fulfill that promise. Despite not knowing the Queen for long, Alistair could tell that a rare and bittersweet yet motherly smile has appeared on her lips. I see. It seems Alden can rest easy then. I grieve for your father, truly. He was a close friend of my father, and like an uncle to me. He never fails to deliver wonderful gifts every time he visits. The Queen chuckles in fondness, but her face returns to a somber gaze. I know your brother also served in our military briefly until the attack on Fort Theron. My condolences. Alistair nods his head. Thank you, my Queen, but I rather not discuss it. I still mourn for the both of them. Yes, my humble apologies, Lord Alistair, and another as well for my court today. You were in attendance, I believe? I was. Under typical circumstances, it would not have been so chaotic, but... Excuse me for stating the obvious again, but these are hardly typical circumstances. But I've taken up enough of your time. I am certain you wish to know why I have asked you to be here. Yes, my queen. How may I serve? She takes a glance at Alter as she begins to speak, then directs her sight back to Alistair. I will get to the heart of the matter. I believe we have a traitor in our midst. The young noble's body suddenly tenses up. What makes you think that? It is the only logical conclusion. The Vizians could not have broken through our front line and snuck inland unless someone is directing them from the capital. And are you asking me to find the traitor? Precisely. I know it is a heavy burden, but I know not whom I can trust inside this city. You're not from around here. Lord Alistair, in your name, will allow you to move through my court relatively easily. Alter had been investigating for some time, but we have very limited options regarding direct action. Not to mention we have the refugee crisis and the war to contend with. I see. Alistair replies absently as he melts into his memories. I understand if you cannot assist, but I would not ask this of you. No, he interrupts thoughtlessly. Though after he realizes what he just did, he quickly apologizes and continues. I'll do it. I will help you find this traitor. The queen smiles with relief and nods confidently at Alistair. The young Carlyle asks with restrained eagerness, Do you suspect anyone? We have compiled a short list, but it is nothing more than suspicion at this point. The queen turns to her marshal. Alter, would you be so kind? He hands Alistair a parchment, and the young noble scans through the names on the list. Not Lord Calder? Calder? No, not at all. He hates me, and perhaps his reasons make sense to him, and while I do not agree with his opinions, they do not speak of betrayal or anything in those terms. I see. How do you wish for me to begin? Proceed as you have, Lord Alastair. You have developed a friendship with Lord Decorous, is that correct? I have. Good. He is perhaps the only other man outside my court I can fully trust. He can assist you in navigating the capital and getting to know some names on the list. Do you wish for me to inform him of my task? The queen takes a moment to consider, but shakes her head. No. The less who know your task, the better. But more importantly, gain the trust of the others and report anything you find to alter. He will assist you. Understood. I will do my utmost, your majesty. Alastair neatly tucks the parchment into his jacket. Thank you, Lord Alastair. I'm counting on you. My queen, if I may, there is one detail I neglected to mention during my arrival. I dare not say this in open discussion, but the Vizians who attacked us. They took Father Decorous first and interrogated him about something called a silver star. Silver star? The queen looks confusingly at her marshal and archmage, neither showing any reaction. I'm afraid I don't know anything about a silver star. I see. I only wish to inform you of this, your majesty. I will investigate this immediately. If the Vizians are looking for it, then it is crucial we find out what it is. We will look into it while you work with Alter to find the traitor. Thank you once again, my lord. Alistair nods as he stands up from his chair and bows to the queen. He turns to the marshal and bows to him afterward. I look forward to working with you, Marshal Alter. Alter replies with a slight nod. The young noble turns away, walking out of the room, and as the door closes behind him, he pulls out the long list, along with the parchment of copied letters, and gazes at them. A traitor, Alistair whispers through his teeth. Alistair steps through the layers of halls and stares across the palace until he reaches the familiar lobby again. After his descent and arrival at the door, he looks about for Decorous and sees him waiting by the lobby, but besides him is a young girl, younger than him by a little less than half a decade, with a slender frame and smooth, snowy white skin, with beautiful golden hair that flows like river down to her waist in a straight line. She adorns a beautiful dress of frilly pink and surrounded by handmaiden, as well as 2 royal guards standing behind her. He approaches the two as they talk, and the guard subtly gazes at the young noble. Decorous spots Alistair first and waves at him, directing the young girl's attention to him. She turns her head and stares at the young noble with a pair of piercing aquamarine-colored eyes, wide and big like diamonds in the sea as the sun cuts through and reflects the light within, and the redness on her cheek contrasting the paleness of her skin, bringing out the features of her round face. Decorous introduces the young girl to Alistair. Princess, this is Lord Alistair. He is here from Idris to assist with the refugee crisis. Lord Alistair, this is the daughter of the Queen, Princess Sierra. The princess lifts her dress slightly with the tip of her fingers and bows gracefully, with a deliberate, slow, delicate songbird's voice that enunciates every word perfectly and precisely. She introducing herself. Greetings, Lord Alistair. I am Sierra Thetalia Primos or Senera. It is a pleasure to meet you. Alistair returns the bow. Greeting, Princess. I am Alistair Preston Carlyle, and the pleasure is all mine. He takes her hand and gently places his lips on her glove. The young princess giggles with her other hand over her lips as Alistair takes a short glance at the handmaiden behind her, who's also giggling to themselves while staring at him. His attention returns to the young princess as he says, My pardon for intruding upon your conversation with Lord Decorous. Oh, no, not at all, she shakes her head, looking over to Decorous. We were not discussing anything of importance. The elder nobleman nods in agreement with a smile as the princess turns back to Alistair. So you've come to the capital to assist with the refugees? Indeed. I wish to help however I can. My, such humbleness from a noble. A rare sight here. Sadly, a rare sight anywhere, my princess. She giggles while shielding her lips. Well, I must be meeting with my mother soon. It is such a pleasure to meet you, Lord Alistair. Most certainly, princess. The young noble smiles, showing his gleaming row of teeth. The princess's cheek becomes even more cherry red as she says her farewell. Farewell, princess. She giggles and looks away before entering the castle with her entourage of giggling handmaidens and royal guard. Casper's limps beside Alistair and gently nudges him on the elbow. Alistair turns to the nobleman, sees the face twisted in restrained glee and slyness. What? He exclaims, even as he tries to contain his own smile. Nothing, Lord Casper's replies, limping to his carriage. What? Alistair asks again. Nothing at all, Lord Alistair. Casper's replies mockingly. The young noble sighs and climbs into the carriage after him. When the door closes, the elder noble continues, You really should use that handsome face of yours to your advantage. What is that supposed to mean? You were only young once, Lord Alistair. Please, the young noble dismisses Casper's words. The carriage moves out of the palace grounds and out into the streets. As they pass by, they can hear the heralds already announcing the Queen's decree, surrounded by crowds of concerned citizens. However, the details regarding the Vizian's attack of the inlands are conveniently left out. So where shall we begin? Alistair turns away from the window and towards Lord Decorous instead. Excuse me? Where to begin, Lord Alistair? Certainly you have some idea of how you wish to assist with the refugee crisis. Yes. Though in truth I have not the slightest idea. I assume since Father Decorous was a clergy representative, he would make his way to the Grand Cathedral first. That is a sound idea. The Grand Cathedral has certainly been the spearhead of the refugee crisis, and they have the most likely heard of Father Decorous' departure by now. I believe he served as a clergyman in Alastair for a time before he moved to Idris. To the Grand Cathedral, then. Alastair rests his head on his knuckle as he gazes out the window, with nary a thought, except for the Father Decorous' final moments. The carriage arrives before the Grand Cathedral, and the young nobleman steps out as Lord Decorous is being assisted by the driver. Alistair looks up at the tall building. While its size is certainly impressive, it is no more as awe-inspiring as the ivory towers back at home. Growing up with similar architectures and fervent devotion to the gods in the form of statues and paintings, the buildings and its decor are no more significant to him than another rock in the forest. They casually step into the garden of the church, passing by statues of the divines, and enters the building itself. Even the interior reminds him much of home, with the same strictness and authority as the order, but instead of demonic exorcists and robes, the militia of Santa Lucia walks about with their paladins and golden armors, with worshippers littered about. But perhaps the one major difference is Idris had never received nearly as many pilgrims or worshippers from the outside. His entry draws the attention of the clergyman nearby. The old priests greet the two nobles with a bow. Lord Decorous. Father Dane, Decorous returns the greeting. How are you today? I am well. This is Lord Alistair Preston Carlyle from Idris. Idris? The priest looks at Alistair with surprise, gradually coming to a realization. Ah, I see. I will bring you to the cardinal. The two noblemen give their thanks as the priest leads them from the main halls to the upper levels of a wide-set marble stairs. At the highest floor in one of the towers of the cathedral lies a single wooden door. Father Dane knocks on the door and a man's voice replies from within. Come in. The priest pushes open the door, and the two are guided into a room that spans almost the entire width of the tower, with a higher ceiling than Alastair's own mansion. The room possesses walls of gold and white, beautifully decorated, with giant murals of various scenes from the Holy Tome, such as the goddess calling upon her knights to defend against the Black Titan, or granting the seed of life to the ancient hero, Cortarius. On the other side of the room are countless cases of books, odd gadgets, and globes scattered about the room in a neat and organized fashion. Slanted wooden tables with large parchments covered in sketches surround the room, and weird contraptions hang in the air by thin threads of string. Even a large open balcony rests at the very end, with even stranger and larger contraptions, unlike any cardinal's quarter Alistair had never seen. Sitting before one of the slanted tables in the midst of a sketch is a man perhaps only a decade older than Lord Caceres, in a casual woven linen clothing and pants, with a clean-shaven face and short, pulled-back black hair. He removes a copper monocle from his eye, laying it down carefully on the table before turning to his guests. Father Dane, good afternoon. How are you today? I am well, Cardinal. As you know, this is Lord Caceres. The young lord limps before the cardinal, and the two shake hands. Welcome, Lord Caceres. I see you a few times during our communion. Is that not correct? A few. I must admit I have neglected my duty to the goddess since the war began. Ah, yes, that is something I can attest to as well. And this is Lord Alistair from Idris. I see. The cardinal takes Alistair's hand and gives it a gentle shake. Alistair Preston Carlyle, I presume? Yes, Cardinal. My name is Lotus Fahrenheld. I am the Cardinal of Dallastai Chapter. Thank you for bringing them to me, Father Dane. Certainly. I will be returning to my duties now. Of course. Father Dane takes off and gently closes the door behind him. The cardinal directs the two men to the chairs on the side besides tall rows of bookcases. Please, take a seat. While Alastair and Caceres take a chair, the cardinal clears one of his slanted tables of items before pulling it closer to the center of the room, flattening it for his guest. The two noblemen pull their chairs to the table and take a seat. Alastair looks down at the table, pushing against it as he stares at it strangely, while the cardinal takes his seat. Worry not, Lord Alastair, it will not fall over. My apologies, Cardinal. It's only rather strange. I suppose so, but I built a lock in it to prevent the table from moving back and forth. It is as stable as any other table, and I can tilt it back up later so I can sketch on it. You built it? It is a hobby. People find my disposition towards science and technology to be odd. It is, wouldn't you say, for a cardinal? How so? Nobody thinks twice if a priest can cast spells, but one who can make tables that tilts a little is odd. I do not mean to offend. The cardinal chuckles, then replies, I am not offended, Lord Alistair. I am only saying that the masses have strange misconceptions about the world. People seem to accept magic only because it has always been there, but they neglect to realize so has technology, just that it has taken different forms. The way I see the two, they are one and the same. Both harness the power that the god has provided us in this world. To me, they are both methods of devotion in a sense. The Vizians would disagree, especially where magic is concerned. Yes, unfortunately, but in some ways their lack of mana capacity has certainly pushed them to be quite technologically competent. If it was not held by an isolationist regime, who is to say what benefit they could bring to the world when Vizian science combines with elven magecraft? But I digress. You are here about Father Decorous, I presume. Alistair nods his head quietly with a somber look. Yes, when the news of his death first reached us, it spread quickly. He served here for a while when he came back from Santa Lucia. He was loved here. Will his body be returning to Idris? Yes, I had someone carry it back. I thought it was appropriate that he be buried here. My apologies. There. No, not at all. You are right, Lord Alistair. I think he would rather have been buried in Idris than in Dallas Tie. The cardinal smiles to himself. He would probably call our cemeteries crowded and noisy. Alistair let out a weary laugh. Yes, he did say that about the capital. You were the last to see him, right, Lord Alastair? I was. Did he... I believe it was a painless death, and he was defiant to the end. That is good. We will all miss him greatly. Cardinal, there is something I wish to ask you about. The Vizians, when they attacked us, they isolated Father Decorous. They seemed to be looking for priests. They were asking about something called a silver star. The Cardinal's body makes a subtle jump as his position begins to shift uncomfortably for a second. But he settles back into his usual demeanor with such quickness that most would have missed it, but not Alistair. The Cardinal then replies, "A silver star. How odd. I'm afraid I know nothing about anything called a silver star." I see. There are many mysterious circumstances that surround this war. Alistair leans against his chair as he strokes his chin in thought. Indeed, it is no mystery that there are too many casualties. Yes, speaking of such, Father Decorous originally came to assist with the refugee crisis. I'd like to fulfill his promise to the best of my ability. Of course, we can use the additional help. Our cathedral is filled to the brim with refugees, and we are so heavily short-staffed here. What with the battlefield requiring healers, one more set of hands is of tremendous help, Lord Alistair. Who should I talk to in regards to this matter? You can speak with Father Dane, or any of our priests, really. We all have our hands full, and any of them could use the help. I will do that, then. Thank you, Cardinal. No, I owe you my thanks. In some ways, I feel a part of Father Decorous has finally returned to his home here. With a nod, Alistair and the Cardinal exchange a farewell, handshake. Then the priest turns to the elder noble as well. It is nice to see you again, Lord Caceres. My pleasure. The two men take their leave. Once the door closes, Alistair stares at the wooden door intensely. You neglected to mention this silver star to the Queen, Caceres remarks. Oh, I didn't want to mention it in public, but I spoke to the Queen about it in private earlier. And? She doesn't appear to know anything about it, but agreed to look into it. Alistair sighs, then directs his gaze at Caceres. Lord Caceres, would you keep this conversation between us? Certainly, Lord Alistair. I can hardly do anything with such information. Thank you. The older nobleman stretches out his arm and makes an exaggerated yawn. It had been a long day. What do you say about having dinner at my home? It is closer from here than the inn, and the sun would be well under when you have returned. I would be honored, Lord Caceres. As am I, Lord Alistair. I have not had a guest in years, and I would love to cook for someone other than myself for once. The two men begin their descent, and the young Carlyle asks, You cook for yourself? Yes, it is one of the few things I take too much pleasure in to leave to a servant. I can assure you, Lord Alistair, and pardon my language, but I am one damn good cook. You have me feeling quite eager, Lord Caceres. Alistair follows with a smile on his lips.